Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kimberly Tyson, the Marketing and Program Director for the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center and Nightlight Christian Adoptions. This evening, we are pleased to have you joining us for the Embryo Donation Donating for Life webinar. Embryo donation and adoption has been used by thousands of families to bring newborn babies into their loving care. I've been working to educate people throughout the United States on embryo donation and adoption for the past 7 years. Our own Snowflakes embryo adoption program has seen over 380 babies born through the program, and the Snowflakes team has helped families like you donate over 5,000 embryos, and that represents about 1,000 donor families. It is a very well-regarded program here in the United States. Joining me tonight for our presentation is Leah Freeman, who works in client services for the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program. Leah works daily with families who are interested in placing their embryos with an adopting family using the successful Snowflakes Embryo Adoption model. So before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation using the questions you submit through the Q&A feature. We encourage you to submit your questions at any time during the session, and we'll answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand portion of the screen, type your question into the dialog box, and click the send button. If you happen to be in the full screen mode, you can click on the question mark icon on the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And this will open the Q&A panel on your screen only, so you don't need to be worried about what's going on other folks' screen. When you submit your question, it will be visible to all of the panelists, but not visible to other attendees. We will be distributing a copy of today's presentation and a comprehensive list of all answers to questions submitted during the webinar today. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please contact WebEx Technical Support. The number is there on your screen, which is 866-229-3239. And as a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. So you're joining us tonight because you have remaining embryos, and you might already have a comprehension of these first few slides that I'm going to be sharing with you, but let's just start at the basics. Your family is complete, but you still have embryos in frozen storage. Now what? Couples who choose in vitro fertilization, they have chosen it to build their families, and frequently more embryos are created than they end up using. Thus, we have excess embryos in frozen storage, and oftentimes those embryos are being retained for the future pregnancy attempts of the couple who had them created. The end result, however, of all this participation in vitro fertilization is that now there are well over 600,000 embryos in frozen storage in the United States. And one of the things I am doing as the director of the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center is to try and help educate folks like you that one of the choices that's available to you is to donate your embryos to another family for reproductive donation. So when your family is complete, you may still have frozen embryos in storage, and you have to decide what to do with those embryos. For many people, this is a difficult decision. For some people, it's not a difficult decision at all because they were considering what they would do with remaining embryos before they ever created them. But you may not have been prepared for this outcome of having remaining embryos. You may have thought differently about your embryos before you created them, and now you have children that have been born from this set of embryos, and now the embryos have taken on new value, new meaning to you. You feel more responsibility toward them. You may feel a little overwhelmed and unsure of what to do with the remaining embryos, so we want to share with you what your options are. The first thing that is available, and sometimes a distasteful option for people, is to just thaw the embryos and discard them. Obviously, that does destroy the embryo. You may donate your embryos for research purposes, and that will also destroy the embryos. You can just keep them frozen indefinitely and continue to pay the storage fees for that. That's also an option that a lot of people take, with the idea of, hey, if I don't think about it, I don't have to decide anything about it. But we want to help motivate folks to think about this choice that they need to make and make a decision about it. So, of course, the last one is the one that we are promoting tonight, which is to donate to another couple, so that you are giving the embryos the opportunity for which you did create them, which is life. So let's take a little bit closer look at the impact of each of the choices. If you choose to keep them frozen indefinitely, sometimes not dividing is the easier choice. Maybe you're just not ready. You have to continue to pay the storage fees. What we have found in our communications with clinics is that the longer embryos remain in storage, the more likely the owners are going to abandon the embryos and just walk away from them. So we want to try and eliminate the number of abandoned embryos in storage, so we don't want that to happen. We want people to make decisions about them. And if you don't make a decision about your embryos, you're leaving that difficult decision for other people to make for you in the event of a divorce or death. If, some sort of tragic death occurs in your family and the embryos are left over, now the decision is going to be left up to people who didn't even have a part in creating the embryos, and how much more difficult the decision will be for them. The next item we're going to look at is discarding the embryo. This discontinues your obligation for storing the embryos, of course. It's a pretty quick and simple closure to the entire process. Some may choose to have a special ceremony as they are discarding the embryos, but again, it does destroy the embryos. I have also heard that some people will thaw the embryos and transfer them into the womb at a time when the womb is definitely not prepared to receive them, and encourage the growth within the uterus, and that also destroys the embryos because there is no environment for them to grow in. It's an interesting take on discarding embryos, I have to say. Surrendering them to science for research. I think one of the main reasons people do this is they're interested in helping find cures for diseases. And that's a very noble reason for donating embryos to science. Unfortunately, to date, no successful treatments have been developed using human embryos for stem cell research and such. You've heard a lot about that in the news. But lots of therapies have been created using adult stem cells. And when you do embryonic stem cell research, it destroys the embryos. When you're doing adult stem cell research, it doesn't matter that you're destroying the embryos. The adult that they were harvested from is still alive. And in many instances, their stem cells are being harvested to help cure them. It's really interesting stem cell research. Couples may have a sense that they've made a difference in the world when they donate to science. Again, it destroys the embryo. If you donate to another family for family building, it's a life-affirming way to resolve this challenging dilemma of having remaining embryos. You can be providing a source of hope to another person or couple, and your children are genetically related to any of the children born from the donated embryos. So you need to be thinking about the communication between you and the recipient family, and how are you communicating with the children that you've already given birth to. Perhaps you've already started down a path where you've decided, oh, secrecy is our family policy. Well, we have a lot of webinars oriented towards how do you communicate with your children about their unique origins, and we are certainly not advocates of secrecy, and we would be encouraging you to have some communications with your children as well as communications with the adopting family, because that's the best outcome for the child and the children that have been born, for you as the donor, and for them as the adopting family. Other considerations can be that if you are in this place of indecision, you know, can be difficult to know what to do with remaining embryos, especially if you haven't even considered that you might have remaining embryos at some point. Now you're to that place and you're like, wow, honey, we have these remaining embryos, and January rolls around and you get your bill for storing the embryos again, and that's usually when a lot of discussion comes about of what should we do with these remaining embryos. We don't want to continue to pay the storage fee. Many clinics do not offer a lot of resources for their clients to review and fully understand what their options are. The Embryo Adoption Awareness Center has been working with fertility clinics around the country to try and solve this particular issue by providing those resources, but still many people are unfamiliar with the opportunity for directed donation. Of course, the expense of storage averages about $600 a year, but there are certainly clinics out there that are charging, 3 times that amount for storage, and that can be really hard on families financially. It also is another reason that embryos become abandoned, because people can't pay the fee, they don't know what the solutions are that are available to them, and they end up walking away from the embryos. There are not a lot of options for storage that are offered, and so most families keep their embryos stored at the clinic where they had them created, again, because they don't know what other options may be available to them. So what is this process of embryo donation? Well, the first step in the process is determine if you are interested in a designated, meaning you're choosing the family who's going to receive your embryos, or an anonymous donation. An anonymous donation has a lot of connotations to it. It might be that you're going to donate to a clinic and you never know anything about who receives your embryos. Through an agency like Snowflake's, an anonymous donation might mean that you have some idea about the adopting family, but you don't have any communications with them. You're not known by one another, but an adoption agency is always going to keep a record of the match that has been made between the two families in spite of any non-communication between the two families. But you have to determine, do I want to be able to choose the family who receives my embryos, or do I just want to donate them anonymously? So that's like the first step in the process. Then you need to determine which programs will meet the criteria that you have for donating your embryos, and that might be a fertility clinic or an adoption agency. And now we're going to take a closer look at, well, what does that mean? If you donate through a fertility clinic, I'm going to start there. Both organizations, a clinic and an agency, are going to require the FDA blood work and testing that is required for donating embryos. But when you donate to a clinic, you are turning over ownership of your embryos to the clinic, and the clinic is going to divide your embryo donation among as many families as they feel they can help with your donation. And that is a significant difference between the Snowflakes program and a clinic program. I was just listening to a clinic program today on embryo donation, and they made it very clear that this is exactly what they do. They used the example of a family who donated 6 embryos, and their practice is to give no more than 2 embryos to each recipient family. And so they were able to divide those 6 embryos among 3 families. The downside to this process is kind of twofold. One is the donor family never has any idea if there were any children born as a result of this donation. None of the families know that they have genetic siblings all amongst them. Don't you believe that if people are coming to this particular clinic to have their IVF treatment or to donate their embryos, they probably all live kind of in a similar geographic area. And I think that one of the very big upsides of donating through an agency is the level of knownness or openness that you're going to establish with the recipient family so that you do have an idea of where the genetics are. The other downside to the recipient family for donation through a clinic is that they're only receiving 2 of these genetically full genetic embryos, and let's say they have a baby, they go 9 months later, they give birth to a child. A year and a half later, they decide, hey, we want to have another baby, so we come back to the clinic, but you're not going to get embryos that have the same genetics as the first child that you gave birth to. That's a very different scenario than works through the Snowflakes program. So in an adoption agency, you are going to be working with a social organization. So the agency is going to be looking at this as more than a medical procedure. And oftentimes what happens in a clinic is just very clinical. It's a medical procedure. But through an adoption agency, we're looking not only at the medical aspect of the embryo donation and adoption, but also the social and emotional elements of that. And so the donor family completes an application. You complete what we call a family profile. You have to, of course, do your FDA blood work and testing for donating the embryos, and you get to review the profiles of the adopting families that are provided to you by the agency and choose the family. And so if you were that family that had 6 remaining embryos, your 6 remaining embryos would all go to that singular adopting family. And part of the matching process that the Snowflakes team is doing is to make sure you're being matched with a family who has the financial ability to do multiple frozen embryo transfers, the desire to do multiple frozen embryo transfer, the desire to have multiple children in their family, and what that does for the adopting family allows them to give birth to children that are fully genetically related to one another, and you can have knowledge about the children that are born as a result of your donation. So I want to circle back around to this idea about the cost for embryo storage. I mentioned that it's on average about $600 per year. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's a great deal more. And this can become a financial burden to a family, especially if your family is complete. And when you get that bill, you're kind of scratching your head and saying, why are we continuing to pay to store these embryos that we're never going to use? We really got to decide what we're going to do with these embryos. And then you start to think, well, will the adopting family pay for the storage of the embryos? Generally speaking, no. The adopting family doesn't pay for the storage of the embryos until they own the embryos. And remember, in the United States, embryos are property and not people, and so the exchange of the embryos between the donor and the adopter is governed by property law. And so until the property leaves your possession into the possession of the adopting family by contract, you are responsible for the storage fees of the embryos. So Nightlight Snowflakes program was thinking about, wow, how could we come up with a storage solution for people who want to donate their embryos? Say it's January and you're facing that renewed annual storage fee and it's $1,000 to store your embryos at your clinic. But you know that you really would be interested in donating your embryos to another family. So we've come up with this program with the Fairfax Cryobank, which is located in Austin, Texas. This storage program is available to all of our clients who choose to donate their embryos to another family through the Snowflakes program. We educate you about this particular program. We're doing some of that right now. You fill out your donor application with the Snowflakes team, and Snowflakes moves you into the matching process. But before you move into the matching process, you become a full client of Snowflakes, and we can make arrangements for your embryos to be shipped to the Fairfax Cryobank for storage. Well, what's the advantage of doing that? Well, it's $350, and that includes 1 year of storage. It includes shipping the embryos from your clinic, where they're stored now, to the Fairfax storage facility in Texas. It includes the cost of the shipping container because, of course, your embryos are in frozen storage. They're cryopreserved and need to remain that way while they're being shipped. It is shipped by FedEx, and they are then stored in this state-of-the-art cryobank in Texas. There are no fees to you as the donor for removing the embryos from storage at Fairfax. So once your embryos are matched with the family through snowflakes based on your input, the embryos then are shipped to where the donor or the adopting family wants to have their frozen embryo transfer. At that point, your expenditures are completed. Generally, the matching process is usually no more than 12 months and usually much less than 12 months. So, you know, if you're facing a $1,000 storage fee at your clinic and you've decided, hey, we want to donate those to another family, this might be a great way for you to reduce your cost by up to $650 in that particular instance, and you know that at the same time you're moving forward in doing something positive for your remaining embryos in matching them to another family or choosing another family who is going to try and give birth to those embryos. If for some reason you got to store for another year, it's only $300 a year for storage at Fairfax. I'm always asked the question, well, what if I don't want to donate? Can I store my embryos at Fairfax? Yes, you can, but not at this price. This price was negotiated between Nightlight and Fairfax. I believe the storage program at Fairfax is $400 a year plus the shipping, which is runs about $150 to $200 for the shipping of the embryos from where they are now to the Fairfax facility. Well, now I am going to turn the mic over to Leah Freeman. And Leah, why don't you kind of go into the details of how this snowflakes process works?
Yeah, so like Kimberly said, my name is Leah Freeman, and I'm the Genetic Family Coordinator for the Snowflakes program. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Snowflakes program specifically looks like and what the process would look like, just to give you the next steps to take in your journey regarding, you know, what your options are for, you know, the future of your embryos. And so obviously, so step one would be submitting an application. So often families come to me and they say, okay, this is, you know, a very overwhelming decision for us. You know, we're in this position. I feel like there's so many different, you know, ways we could go. Where would we even get started with your program? So the first step would be the application. So this does include your medical background. That's actually the bulk of the application would be the self-reported health history. So that's going to be asking the health history, you know, for you, for your spouse, for, you know, any children that you had, even relatives, you know, maybe grandparents, just to make sure that there's, you know, no major medical concerns. If there are major medical concerns, we'd still be able to work with you, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's that portion. And then the two other parts that are very important in the application, number one, are the authorization to release health information forms. Those are important because that's what actually allows us to be able to contact your clinic and get all of the embryology information so that you don't have to. So a lot of times families go into this thinking, okay, do I have to, you know, get all of the information on my embryos and all of my medical records and everything? And we actually take care of that for you. So those authorization forms that are signed allow me to go ahead and contact your clinic directly and receive all of the embryology information for when you're ready to go into matching. The other part of that application that's very important is your preferences section. Oftentimes this is the section that is the most personal for families because it's at the point where you get to decide, you know, what's important for you in an adoptive family. Like Kimberly said, you can be as involved or not involved as you'd like in this process. So if you do want Snowflakes to choose a family for your embryos, you are more than welcome to indicate that. You're also able to put those preferences, even if you're in that position where you know Snowflakes is going to choose a family for you, you can still fill out that preferences section. There's about 10 different preferences that you can put. You put how important they are to you based, you know, on a scale from 1 to 10, and that could be anything, you know, from educational background to race to, you know, let's see, financial stability, education level. So all of those different things, you know, every family values different things regarding an adopting family, and so you're able to put your specific preferences on there. Step 2 would be creating a family profile. This is often done in conjunction with the application. You're more than welcome to send in your family profile before your application, or go ahead and submit your application and turn in your family profile later and spend more time working on it. That's completely fine. that involves, some pictures of your family and just basically gives an overview and a glimpse into your family. I know a lot of families, usually ask me, how much information am I supposed to disclose? What if I want to be more anonymous? We can cater that to your needs as well. So you can share however much or how little you want in that family profile, but the purpose of it is basically to give the adopting family a picture of who you are as a family and how you came to this point where you did decide to donate your embryos. If you are choosing the Fairfax storage option, Snowflakes will send a letter of confirmation to Fairfax letting them know that you are a full Snowflakes client. So at that point, kind of how it looks in a time frame is you would submit your application as well as your family profile. Then we receive all of your embryology information, and once we receive all of your embryology information as well as all of your application documents, that's when you're a full client with Snowflakes, and we can go ahead and give you the Fairfax referral so that we can go ahead and coordinate the shipment from your current facility over to Fairfax. And at that time, you would also be able to go into the matching stage. So those embryos, like Kimberly said, would be at Fairfax while you're in the matching stage. Next slide, please. Okay, so with matching, this is often, the section that I get a lot of questions about. Are we able to choose the family? Are we able to talk to the family beforehand? Are we able to not know anything about the family beforehand? We do understand that every family is different. So you're able to define that criteria for the embryos or for the family that will receive your donated embryos. We do match you with potential recipients. So how the process actually works is once both sides have created their family profile, we go ahead and, see all of your preferences on your application. And then we will actually one by one send you a family profile of a potential adopting family via email usually, and you can look it over and see what you think. And if you decide, yep, this looks like a good fit, we want to move forward with this family, then we go ahead and send them your family profile. And then if they say, yep, it looks like a good fit, then we go ahead and move forward into contracts and shipping. So that's basically how the matching process works. And so of course after that match is made, Snowflakes does provide the legal contract in order to move forward into the shipping process. Next slide, please. So then step 3 is the adopting family will complete their frozen embryo transfer, or FET. So this is after the embryos have actually been shipped over to their facility and the doctors actually have the transfer completed. And then you have the choice to know, based off of your preferences of openness or closedness, on the outcome of the frozen embryo transfer. So I have, we'll talk a little bit more about communication preferences, but I often have families tell me, well, I don't necessarily want to have as much open contact, but can I still know if a pregnancy has resulted? And yes, we are more than happy to do that. We have had some families say that they don't want to know anything. That's very, very rare, because most families do want to at least know if there was a pregnancy so that they can emotionally kind of process what that looks like, but you're able to say whether you do want to know the results or not, regardless of the openness that you have with the actual family. Next slide. Okay, so the communication between families. So overall, you do have the option to have as much or as little communication with the adopting family as you'd like. So this could come in many different forms, which we're going to now discuss. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the different, I kind of call them levels of communication between the families. I'm going to actually start with the one in the middle, the infrequent one, because that's actually often the one that people prefer most. I kind of talk about it as it sits on a spectrum. We have families that want zero contact. We have families that, have vacations every year. And so the infrequent one is somewhere in the middle where we kind of call it semi-open contact. And this is actually where families have the option to go ahead and send email updates back and forth through our agency. So that means that there's no actual direct personal identifying information given in those emails. There's also no phone numbers or addresses or anything like that, but it does give the families an option to be able to communicate, but it's through the agency so that there is that level of comfortability. The one at the top would be the direct contact. We do have families that do this. I just got off the phone with a woman today who said that her Snowflake's baby is now in elementary school, and she was talking about, what their lives have looked like in the last couple of years, and she let me know that their genetic family was actually able to stay with them. I guess they have a very large estate, and their genetic family was able to stay with them for a week, and they were able to vacation together. And she was going on and on about how great it was that they were able to get together, and how she didn't know what to expect, but it was a huge blessing for her being able to do that with the family. So in that case, that would be more direct contact. And then on the other end, we have the rarely route. And so this would be where the agency does maintain the records, so we have all the information, and then any communication is done through the agency as a mediator. It's the same as the infrequent level, but the difference being that, communication might be determined later on in the future. So if you're at a point right now where well, we're not really sure, kind of what we want, we're thinking more closed, and then, maybe if the children want, to know kind of their story later on, and want to know more information or want to have contact with the family later on, we can have that door open for them if they want that. We are more than happy to do that for you if you want to go down the more, the rarely route. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we do match you with an adopting family who is interested in the same level of communication as you are. So in that case, if you were really coming into this knowing that you wanted direct contact, you want the children to have a relationship, that you want to, get together every once in a while, we're not going to match you with a family that doesn't want to know anything. We want to be able to match you with a family that you're comfortable with, because you are going to have some level of a relationship with this family for the rest of your life. So no matter how open or closed you are, we want to make sure that you are comfortable with that. And one of the major aspects of that is the communication level. And so on the same page, if you did know that you wanted to be more closed off and not open up that door as much, we would match you with a family that was in that same boat. Next slide, please. So the benefits of more open communication. The reason we say this is because oftentimes this seems to be the one that most families are really receptive to and find to be very, very beneficial for their own family. The first one being that the parents and or the genetic siblings are aware and know one another. One question that I get a lot, that a lot of genetic families, might feel uncomfortable asking, but it's a completely valid question, is what if our children and these children from this other family grow up and get married? And that's a very, valid concern. You hear of these stories on the news where, crazy things happen. And so we do encourage at least a knowledge of one another. And so if a family is coming in wanting to be completely closed off, we usually do discourage complete closed communication, just because usually as long as you know the first names of the couple and the state, it does prevent that from happening. And so on that level, we're able to go ahead and see the benefits of more open communication, because the genetic siblings would know each other. And then updates once a year through Nightlight means you do get phone photos or email updates without exchanging personal contact information. So that's what we were talking about regarding you're able to now have this open communication without the more uncomfortable feeling of, okay, well, what if they have my phone number? Or, often the genetic family is, like, what if they, show up on my doorstep or ask for child support? And, of course, that's never happened ever in our agency. But, we do let families know that that's why they can opt, into having a more limited, in contact through the agency. And then the last one is from a woman that I spoke to a couple months ago, and she was meeting her biological daughter for the first time. This girl was born to another family, and the moms decided that they wanted to meet up. And when she met her, she was just going on and on about how amazing it was. That's the word she kept on using, was amazing, amazing, amazing. And so she said, when I did meet the adopting family and their daughter, it was so amazing because I realized I was able to give this baby, who was once an embryo, a chance at life. And it was so special to see how she interacted with her family. And I knew at that moment that it was all worth it, because she had been feeling more nervous before, because it is, often an overwhelming decision. So having that open communication, she was letting me know how much closure that gave her as well. And so even though every family is different, many times families tell us that that gives them closure because they know that they're able to have that communication and that their children are able to have this knowledge of their genetic siblings without necessarily having it be such a scary thing, if that makes sense. Next slide, please.
Leah, this is Kimberly. I think what I would like to add there, because, you mentioned, and we don't want them showing up at our step asking for child support. What I would like to communicate to our listeners today is that the contracts that you sign in your exchange of property include language about the termination of your parental rights, about the termination of your parental responsibilities, that by contract you are delineating all of these things that you are relinquishing when you're giving the embryos to the other family. And to date, we have never had another question that people are always worried about is, what if the donor family wants to come and take the baby away from me? And this is all language that is in the contracts, and honestly, we have never, ever had that happen. And just like with this donor mother meeting her biological daughter for the first time, she recognized that this is not her daughter, it is the adopting family's daughter, and that she had blessed that family and that child with life.
Yes, exactly. That's one thing that we do let families know, is that through the contract process, we're able to let them, when you do apply, you actually do receive a sample copy of the contract as well. And if you do have additional questions about that, we'd be more than happy to answer that. But we do have a copy of the contract that we give you upon applying, so that you're able to look at, over it before you even get to the matching stage. So if there's anything that you have questions about, we're able to answer those for you. Okay, so regarding the embryo quantities, qualities, grades, labels, etc., we do accept all embryos. Kimberly was talking about this earlier. A lot of times families ask me what the difference is between our Snowflakes embryo adoption program and a lot of clinic donation programs. And one of the biggest differences is that we do accept all embryos. So oftentimes where clinics are very limited with the embryos that they will accept, we are more, accepting of those embryos. So, I just did work with a particular woman that she wasn't able to work with her clinic because the clinic had seen, her grandmother had passed away from cancer. And I think, her husband, somebody in his family had passed away from cancer as well. So they, would not let her donate based on the fact that cancer ran in her family. On that end, that would not be something like that would not be a concern to us at all. If there are major medical concerns, we do let you know if it's going to take longer to match you, but we would certainly be able to work with you. Multiple embryos will be matched with one recipient family rather than being amongst multiple families. I know Kimberly did touch on this a little bit too with the clinic that did divide the embryos into groups of 2. I get this I get this question a lot from families, especially that have, let's say they have 11 embryos, and they're thinking, well, surely no family would be willing to take on, my 11 embryos. And we've actually donated over 20 embryos to one family. And the reason being is because, we're going to match you with a family. If that is your case, we're going to match you with a family that does want multiple transfers and multiple chances at pregnancy. So let's say we have an older couple coming through our program and, they know that they only want one child. We would not place 20 embryos with their family. We would give them a much smaller amount. And so on that end, that's just because it does, prevent a lot of, confusion between, embryos being in different locations in different families. It's often easier. I know every genetic family is different, but oftentimes it's easier too if, you're working with one family, you're, in communication at some level with this family. A lot of times it's easier to process. And on the other end, even if you only have one embryo to donate, we will definitely be able to find a match for you. Oftentimes families ask me, well, have you ever had families, stall out, and have you not been able to, adopt embryos? And we let families know that it's not as much a matter of, an embryo or multiple embryos not being able to be adopted. It's just how long it takes. So if a family did come into our program saying, well, we do only have one embryo available for adoption, I would say that we would definitely be able to work with you on that. And then number 4, embryo quality doesn't matter. So a lot of times clinics do, put grading on embryos and put a huge emphasis on the grade of the embryo and whether or not they can accept the embryo for donation based off of grading. And in our program, just because we've seen so many children born that, maybe didn't have a favorable, quote unquote grading with the clinic, we've seen children resulted from embryos that were over 16 years old, where many clinics would have looked at that and said, we're not going to work with you, we're going to be safe on that end. We've been able to say, yep, as long as you find a clinic that's willing to work with you, we'd be more than happy to go ahead and donate, your embryos regardless of quality, just because we do want to make sure that we're giving every embryo a chance at life. Next slide, please. Okay, and the Snowflakes donation requirements. One of the first ones is that the youngest child in your family must be at least 1 year of age. Number two, the full Snowflakes application paperwork should be completed, so that includes what we were talking about earlier regarding the application and the family profile. And then the third part being embryology records from your clinic or storage facility submitted to us, but we're also the ones that are receiving that, remember. So that's something that you won't have to worry about as long as you've signed the authorization form. I would be the one doing that, so I would be keeping you updated regarding where we're at with the clinic, what we still need, and then once that's completed, we'll be able to move forward into the matching process. There's no financial expense except for paying storage fees. So a lot of times families are like, okay, how much is this going to cost me? And the good part about this is that it's completely free to you. However, you also don't get any compensation for the donation. So it's another question that we receive is, am I able to have some sort of financial compensation for me donating these embryos? And that's not the case. So, but you would not have to pay anything, no. Next slide, please. Okay, so on to FDA requirements. This is becoming more and more of, what my conversations consist of with genetic families, just because FDA requirements are constantly changing. And so we as an agency are wanting to make sure that we are completely compliant with FDA standards. That way, when we work with your clinic and we work with the adopting families clinic, we're making sure that we have all of our ducks in a row and everything's ready to go for the process so that it goes as smoothly as possible. So when you did create your embryos for your own use, there was basic infectious disease testing required. So that means that when you did create your embryos, either you or the sperm or egg donor did have infectious disease testing. The difference between the testing that you would have had completed if you, created the embryos using your own sperm or egg or a donor is that you did have that basic infectious disease testing, whereas the donor had more extensive testing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Next slide. Okay, so now that you're donating your embryos, the FDA considers you donors. This means that you're going to have the full FDA screening as if you were an egg or a sperm donor, if that makes sense. So you would have maybe had basic testing like HIV, Hep B, and then now that you're considered donors, it's going to be more things like CMV and, all these different, it's going to be a wider panel. Once again, we do take care of all of that. So if that is the case, we wait until you're matched and we see what the recipient clinic requires. Oftentimes, the reason we put this up here is because oftentimes this is the case. Very rarely will a clinic say, nope, we're fine. We see that they got the basic infectious disease testing done. Oftentimes, it's going to be where they are going to have you get the full panel. But as it says at the bottom, Snowflakes completely covers the cost for this. So we would give you all of the instructions to do that. We would let you go to a local facility to get your blood drawn, and then we would cover all of the cost for that, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. Okay, and then your donation can help make another family's dream of having children come true. So in summary, the whole process of this is that we want to make sure that we are helping you as much as we can as the genetic family be able to provide the best avenue possible for the future of your embryos. And so we want to make sure that we're giving you all the resources to be able, and the education, like Kimberly was saying, to be able to know if this is a good decision, the right decision for your family. But we have, like she said, had over 380 babies born now through the Snowflakes program, and we've had, even more genetic families call and tell us how much this has meant to them to be able to have closure and to be able to have this emotional process completed regardless of how it turned out. And so it's been a blessing so far to be able to do this, and it's going to hopefully be a blessing to you to be able to have this option for your family.
Leah, thank you so much. That was a great overview of the details of the Snowflakes process in particular. Thank you. Now it is time for some Q&A. And so if any of our listeners today have any questions that they're interested in asking before we close up the webinar tonight, all you have to do is in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, there's a Q&A section. If you don't see the Q&A section, there should be a little icon bar on the bottom toolbar with a question mark on it. If you click on that, it should open that up on your window. type your question into the dialog box there and then click send. And that will send your question off to us here on the panelists and allow us to answer your question while we're live in the webinar. So you think about questions, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you about some upcoming webinars that are going to be available here from the Embryo Adoption Awareness Center. Next on our agenda is actually in November. We don't have this on here, but on November 5th we have Greeting the Loss of a Genetic Child. And if you had your embryos created using donor egg, donor sperm, maybe donor egg and donor sperm, this might be a webinar that would be of value to you. It certainly is a valuable webinar to our adopting families. And we've offered it once before already. We're offering it again because people were really receptive to this topic. So November 5th, Greeting the Loss of a Genetic Child. If you know some people that are interested in adoption, we have an evening webinar called Affordable and Accessible for that. And then in January, we're going to be looking at openness and trying to take the fear factor out of open adoption. A lot of times people hear the word open adoption and they're immediately shutting down about what they believe open adoption is versus what it truly is. So those are some webinars that are coming up in the future, and you can certainly register for those at embryoadoption.org in our education tab at the top of the screen. So we do have a question here, Leah, and it is, how do you fill out the profile if you have eggs from the donor but with the husband's sperm? So you used an egg donor and your husband's sperm. So how do you fill out the profile?
Yes, that's a great question. By profile, if we're talking about the application portion, so regarding the health history, you're actually not required to fill out the health history for your donor. So in place of that, what actually happens is I receive the egg donor profile from your agency, from your clinic, which has the full health history of the donor. So that's one of those things that you don't have to worry about. If you did use an egg donor, you can actually request a specific application from us, and I have actually taken out all of the portions that you would not have to fill out in lieu of having an egg donor, if that makes sense. If it's regarding the family profile, then you wouldn't have to write anything about the egg donor. I know some families have, let's say, one time we had a single man that had used an egg donor, and so in his profile, he wrote a little bit about what he knew about the egg donors and was able to put his information in there as well. But I would say most of the time, families will just choose to give a picture of them. So even though, you might not be biologically related to the embryos, often it's very helpful for the adopting families to get a full picture of who you are as a couple and as a family. And so you would put your own personal information in that family profile and then leave the rest of the egg donor information for the paperwork that I'm going to get from the clinic.
Thanks, Leah. Very thorough. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time, but it certainly doesn't mean that we are not still here to answer your questions throughout these next days or weeks where you're still making a decision regarding your remaining embryos. Leah is certainly available out in our California office. The phone number out there, if you want to jot it down, is 714-693-5437. We do have a couple of websites. One is embryoadoption.org, and the other is snowflakes.org, where you can get information about donation as well. We thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hope that it was a valuable session for you, and hope that you'll be able to make a decision about your remaining embryos soon. Thanks so much. Have a nice evening.